everyone, and welcome. This is SharePoint Power Hour. I'm Laura Rogers, and I usually have Joelle with me. She is busy taking care of some family things today. She will be back, I promise. Don't worry. But I had you all vote. I sent out my newsletter, and in the newsletter, I had you all vote on today's topic. So the winner of the vote was, drum roll, it was permissions on SharePoint permissions using Microsoft Flow. So there are a couple of new Flow actions that have come out in the last couple of weeks. And so it's only 2 actions. So I'm gonna, like I always do, I'm gonna manage to stretch it out and fill up an entire hour talking about 2 new actions. But I'll tell you about them, do some demos, and talk through different scenarios. So this is all about, SharePoint permissions in Flow, which is something that people have been asking for a long time. Now, right now, as of today, I need to say this as of today stuff probably at the beginning of every Power Hour, because I feel bad when people watch these like a year or 2 years later and everything's different. So everything changes so fast that I have to say that, because who knows what it'll be a month from now. So as of today, there are 2 actions, and they are kind of limited in what you can do. I mean, I have seen some third parties that let you, third-party products that let you do very much more granular things with permissions in automation. But this is a start, right? We can accomplish some things. So what prompted me to start using this in the real world was that I had a customer that I had created an approval workflow on just a list of documents. They need to have meeting minutes that need to be approved by a bunch of people. And they started the workflow, and then someone deleted the file that the workflow was running off of. And I could tell because I went and looked at the workflow history, the little log, and the original item that the flow had been running on, I looked at the ID, and then I looked in the list and I scoured the list, and that ID was gone. Like, it didn't exist anymore. Someone had deleted it. And then it probably happened a month ago. So I asked the customer, I said, well, this flow got triggered for a file that's not even there anymore. Someone had actually deleted it and then re-uploaded another file with the same name, but you couldn't tell by looking at it that it wasn't the original one. But then the flow that had started, what happened, right? So I said, do you want me to just lock this down so that when someone starts the approval workflow, nobody can delete the file or mess with the file, because it's got an approval workflow running on it? It's important. We don't want them just deleting it. So that is what, for this case, that is what kind of prompted me to test out these new actions and use them and try them and use them and implement them in a real world scenario. So I made it so that when you kick off the approval workflow, it immediately locks it down so that people just have view access. I think that's what I did, view access to it. So, all right. I will go ahead and share my screen. And Flow, they've changed their interface again. Let me see. Why is it not showing my desktop? Oh, let me see. Oh, my desktop is not available. I have to troubleshoot this real quick. It always just works. Let me see. This is my my XSplit broadcaster is what I use for this. There we go. Okay, that's weird. Gotta make it bigger now. There. And put it behind me. All right. That worked. Okay. So here's Flow. They've changed the interface. Have you all noticed that just in the past few days, that this is all different now? This interface, you may or may not have this in your tenant. So yeah, create is now over here, And my flows, that's usually the first thing I go to, but they've added the AI builder's fairly new, but this create thing, I think, and action items now has approvals and business process flows here under it. All right. So this is the one that I started with the test permissions. So I will just run it and show you what it does first, and then I'll show you how I did it. So I'm going to go to my company policies, and I want to run my, let me unselect that. I'll go to this file called conflict of interest, and I'll look at the permissions. So just a quick way in the new modern interface to look at permissions is by this little manage access thing. So I can see I've got a couple of owners, visitors, members, designers, all have, and the little icon shows you what permission they have on it. So that is the current set of permissions on this specific file. And I mean, it's just getting its permissions from the library that it's in. So I will go run this flow, and I've got this little button that runs my flow. I have a whole other blog post and I think a power hour we did about triggering a flow from a button, but I don't have any input parameters. I'll just click run on my conflict of interest. And so what I have it doing is taking off everybody's permissions and then only giving 2 specific people just view permissions. So this was just something that I was doing as a test. So this is not necessarily what you do in the real world, but I wanted to just kind of show you the functionality first before we start going into all these different scenarios. So I've got this is the one that I just ran it on. So now I'm not sure if I even need to refresh my page or not. I'll just go straight to the information panel. So yeah, okay. Now something to note about permissions is that, and for those of you who are old school SharePoint and you're familiar with the concept of site collection, admins versus SharePoint groups and things like that. Site collection admins are considered owners. And anyone that you make an owner in all the sort of modern team sites and communication sites, anybody you make an owner that is a site collection admin. That is like God mode on the site. They can see and do everything. They can do all the settings. They have permission to every single piece of content in that site, no matter what SharePoint groups are in or anything. So owners always see and edit and full control on every single thing in that whole site collection. So I'm not going to go on my rant about narrowing it down to only 1 or 2 owners. So I've got 2 owners, which is a good practice. And so we are the site collection owners. So this is why it's showing me that because we're owners, we're always going to have owner permission on everything. So even though I ran this flow that completely stripped off all the permissions and added just a couple of new ones, owners still can get to it. So for this customer, when I implemented this, I mean, my customer is an owner on the site. So I said, well, just be careful because, this flow will set it to read only for everybody except you and I are owners, and owners can still delete it. So he or I could easily accidentally delete the file, and what I did with the flow is not going to stop us. So, all right. So it went in and gave these 2 specific people just view permissions on this one item. So that's what the flow did. And I do have, let's look at my settings for the library. And this library is inheriting permissions. So even though it is inheriting permissions from the sites, I am still able to run that action on it. At first, I wasn't sure if I had to go, stop inheriting permissions for that action to work. But even though it's not inheriting permission, it is inheriting permissions, it still lets me do that action. So this is where, if you ever are curious what specific items in a list or library have been set to have separate permissions like I just did, this is where you could click show these items. So these are all items that I've run that flow on and changed the permissions on them individually. So that's where I can see that. All right, let me go back to my policies. Now let's go look at the flow. Let me look and see the questions here real quick in Slack. And that's, if this is the first time you're joining, our Slack channel is the fun place where we have conversations and ask questions and just discuss all of this the whole time during Power Hour. So let's see. Shaylee, I'll look at your question about the approval stuff in a few minutes when we get to the approvals. I'm looking to see if we have any questions about the stuff I've covered so far. Kate and Shaylee, basically it has to do with what client they're using to read their email. If you're talking about asking about people approving something and writing their comments in the approval email, it's just going to be different depending on what your email client is, like Outlook Web Access or Outlook Client, or however you're reading it, and that's how it renders it. It renders it according to that. Okay, so over to the flow. Here's my test permission. So I have a couple of weird things that I had to do in here. So I'll just show you the actions first. So before I go into this one I already created, I don't want to confuse everything. So I'm just going to do, I always hit skip on the screen. I was just going to do a simple one that's just a button trigger, just so I can show you what these actions look like. Okay, so I can type SharePoint here and click SharePoint. So these two new actions are stop sharing an item or folder and grant access to an item or folder. All right, so that's all I'm doing is for the actions for that, I stop sharing it. And then when I stop sharing, I have to tell it which site, which list or library that I'm working in, and then which specific thing, a folder or a file, which specific thing's ID that I want to stop sharing. I'm not going to put that in. I'll just type a number in there for now. And then the other one is, you know what, this really annoys me that SharePoint doesn't show here anymore in this little quick list. Like, how important is MSLin weather? Do y'all use that in flows a lot? Anyway, and then grant access. So this is the magic. This is where the magic happens. Steve says, doesn't this fly in the face of a permissions management strategy? Well, Steve, this is a very specific requirement about a very specific business process in this, when we have our meeting minutes and we have this library, or if you have company policies and you have this specific place that you're doing this, then it's just, I know, and Microsoft kind of held out and didn't put this this action in here for a long time, because maybe that's because it kind of flies in the face of the permissions management strategy. But when it comes to the real world, you need to sometimes manage permissions using a workflow. And so think about like forms you might be filling out that have personnel content, like people's personal information, social security numbers, and things like that. You might need to have people be able to fill out a form, but then lock down that item as soon as they fill out the form. So it's a real world requirement. So, I mean, you can't just yank it away from people and not let them have it, because, people have been trying to figure out ways to do this for a couple of years now, that SharePoint Designer 2010 had it, and then SharePoint Designer 2013 didn't. So I know of people or customers that are still using SharePoint 2010 workflows here and there just because of that specific thing of having to do permissions on items, especially like forms that have personnel information. So yeah, It is important. You don't, you don't want to use it just all over the place willy-nilly, but it's something that's useful in some business processes. All right, so get my site address, list or library name, ID, and that's going to be, and we'll do that dynamically in a minute, that's going to be what specific item that you are doing this to. So it'll probably be the same one. Just put the same number in there. Not that I'm going to run this or anything. All right. So then who am I granting access to? So this is one person. So I can just type like Billy Bob. Now, usually best practice is that you're not going to put individual people's names in hard-coded in your flows and Power Apps and things that you build. It's just a bad idea. People come and go, right? So you're most likely not going to want to do this. So let's see if I have yeah. So I have, this is a like a shared email address, or it's like an email enabled AD security group, just a group of people. So this is where I can say, who am I granting access to? And the only two choices I have here for roles are can edit and can view. So edit is going to give them that edit permission, and view is going to give them read only. So I can say, take everybody's permissions away and then individually put those guys in there. Maybe I want the IT department to edit it, and I can do another action after this where I want the HR department to be able to view it or something like that. So I could do separate grant access actions one after the other if I want to grant access to, various levels of access to different people. And I can also use a semicolon and put multiple people listed here, multiple groups or multiple people. So it's not, you don't have to do one at a time. You just can't pick, if you're everybody that can view, you'd put in this action, and you could do another action where you want to give them edit, and you could say those people can edit. So this, now you don't have to do the notify. When I first saw this, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to send a message to these people. I don't want every time this is automated, everybody getting an email about this. Oh goodness. So you can just change this to no. So you can just not notify them, but you can notify them if you want to. You can change it to yes. And then this is for you to view. You can make it send them a message. There's no such thing as a SharePoint security group steward. A SharePoint group is, anyway. So no, you can't use SharePoint groups. Power Apps and Flow don't recognize SharePoint groups. So yeah, but that is, I always just email enabled security groups is always what you can use in SharePoint, and you can also use them in Flow and Power Apps and all that stuff, and sending emails to them. So if it's just a distribution list, it's not going to show in here either. But you can also use Office 365 groups. That we'll do that next. All right. So those are the two actions really. So you don't have to stop sharing and then grant access. You can just add new people to a file. Maybe they didn't previously have access to it, and when some process is happening, you want to grant them access to it. But those are our two new actions that we're going over. All right, so what I had to do here is I've got my policies, and I want to say the selected item not the selected item, but the selected file. So my trigger in this case would be, I want somebody to be able to click on the item in that SharePoint list like I did at the beginning and be able to trigger the flow that way. Of course, obviously the other options are you can have it triggered when the item's created or modified, other stuff like that. All right. Yeah, Nick, you're right. The SharePoint REST API call, I've seen when you get desperate and you don't want to have to resort to SharePoint 2010 workflows, then yeah, that's another thing I've heard of people doing just as a way to be able to do what we're showing here. All right. So yeah, and I'll show you the Office 365 groups thing. All right. So this is the concept of I want to be able to click on a row and be able to do a flow from here. So see all the flows that I have that I have a action for the selected thing in SharePoint. That's where I'll see them when I select something. So the button is just something extra I added to that column. All right. Now, when you're in a SharePoint list, you are going to use the selected for a selected item trigger, but in a library, you're going to use for selected file. So watch this. This is just kind of one of those little hidden random tips and tricks things. So when I go to SharePoint, I've got for a selected item here. Let me type selected. All it shows me is for selected item. This has got to be a bug, but I've discovered that if I just type selected, don't select SharePoint first, just type selected up here, there's for a selected file. So it's kind of lost, like it's not categorized in the SharePoint category for some reason, but here's for a selected file. All right, for a selected file in what library? In that site, in my policies. All right, so when I select the file, I want to do the workflow. Now the problem is, watch this. When I try to put the ID, I want the ID for the file they selected, right? It doesn't give me any dynamic content. I don't have anything. So I'm going, well, wait a minute, how do I point it to the right item? So this is like a workaround that I'm about to show you. This is a bug, and this is really unrelated to the permissions thing, but it's still useful for being able to manually trigger stuff from a library. So I noticed that so I have to figure out where all my dynamic content is. So if I just to troubleshoot, so this is like troubleshooting fun with Laura. All right. I like using the compose action sometimes just to be able to poke around and figure out what's going on. All right, so notice I see that I have file ID in here, but it's like it doesn't know that it's a number because these fields are expecting a number. So it doesn't know that the for selected file, that file ID is a number, so I have to kind of make it a number. So I'm going to so even if I let's do a variable. So I just kind of wanted to see what my outputs were, because I know I have some outputs, but the only thing it's showing me when I am in the ID field is outputs that are an integer. All right, so I'll go do a variable. So here's the first thing I tried. I tried putting var ID int and making it an integer. And then I still don't have any dynamic content because this has got to be an integer. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just make it an integer using this integer function. But even when I do that, come on, go away. I hate this little box is in the way now. I still don't have any dynamic content to pick from. So I have to do another variable. var ID string. I'll put my file ID in here, and then oh, not just directly, but I have to do an int thing around it. So I make the Well, I'll show you in the other one. I already built it. Hold on. So I go initialize variable, I make it a string, and then I just put the file ID in it. And then I initialize this integer variable. See, this one's an integer, and that's where I'm able to do this int thing and put that variable inside of it. So I'll show you. I'll type it again. So I'm getting the integer of this thing. So then once I do that, then I can put my variable ID integer in all these places. Another thing I could probably do is, for a selected file doesn't give me much information anyway. So a lot of the times when I'm using for a selected file in a library, I will need to have more metadata, more information about that file. So I can do get item, get file, not get item. Get file properties. And it's that same library. And then, yeah, no, so this one still needs an ID too. So I'd still have to do these things before this to be able to, just to be able to get the ID. So y'all got it? So I had to do a variable that's a string and put the file ID in it, and then do a variable that's an integer, and then do this int function to be able to put that other variable inside of it, and then it finally gives me an ID. Okay, so that's the way to get the ID. So then in this case, the next thing you do is the approval. And there it goes. Approvals, start and wait for an approval. And I'll do a approve and reject. I'll just do first to respond. And then the title is going to be approve this thing. So I did the get file properties. See, my for a selected file doesn't have much information. It doesn't have the name of the file, or I mean, hardly anything. So this is, since I did the get file properties thing, then it gives me a whole bunch more information, like the file name. So I'll just type name here, file name with extension, or just name. Who am I going to assign this to? I'll just, bad practice, don't type people's names in here, but let me just do Billy. Item link is, it's in, oops, I typed ink. Item link is in here. It is linked to item. And the description, I can make it be whatever I want to, but I usually just put the name, file name with extension. And then another thing you might want to do is the requester, instead of it being me, the person who created the workflow, I want it to be whoever actually triggered. This is in the trigger. That's whoever actually triggered the flow is going to be the requester. Okay. So we'll go ahead and run this just for fun. I could probably give these better names too. Y'all notice that they have the copy and paste is in here now. So I can copy this to my clipboard. I'll just show you what it looks like. Copy get file properties to my clipboard and go down here, just anywhere I'm adding a new step. And I have this other option here, my clipboard. So then there's my get file properties, and then there's my copy of it. So that's brand new. I'll delete that. You like that? That's a huge time saver, right? Can you pull a dynamic field from the list item you're pulling this permissions on? Yep. Exactly. So you have to do Marilia get file properties, And then what I can do when I grant access is, so let me take these two people off of here, is I can grant access to, I gotta delete them. And I'll just say policy owner. So I have a people field on my list of company policies called policy owner. So I can put the policy owner is going to be the person that I want. I'll say I want the policy owner to have edit permission. And then I can say I want everybody else on the site to have read permission. I'll do that in a minute. We'll go over to an Office 365 group site, which this one isn't. And I'll show you how you can put just everybody in the group. Okay, I'll save that, and I'm not doing anything after the approval. It's not really what it's about, so I'll just go over to the list and my policies, refresh that. So let's see. If I want to check the permissions, if I ever want to go to that sort of old school permissions interface, because that's, you know, if that's what you're used to, that's what you're familiar with, you can do that. You can go to advanced here. So this spreadsheet is still inheriting permissions. So I'll go ahead and run this flow on that spreadsheet. So Chris Rogers is the policy owner. And I'll continue. Okay, so it's running my test permissions workflow. And let's go look at the flow. Well, let's just go look at the permissions on it. Manage access, and look at that. So he is the policy owner. He's in that people field called policy owner on that specific file. So now my flow just took everybody else off of that. No one else has permissions except for him, and he has edit. You can tell by this drop down. Pretty cool. All right, so let's go over to an Office 365 group. Let me see, what do I have here? This is my list of all my. This is my Wonder Laura tenant, my test tenant that I just play around and try stuff in. I'll go to my project team site. Okay, so this is an Office 365 group, and I can tell because it says group, either private or public group at the top. And then I want to, I'm going to kind of do the same thing, but we'll play around with folders and files and stuff, and I'll show you the Office 365 group people thing. So I've got two people in my group. I'm the owner and Billy Bob is a member. I'll just go add her, I'll add one more person. Okay, so I've got 3 people. Okay, and I'll put a file in here, a couple of files just to play around with. Okay, and so now I can do a similar flow on here. So watch this. This is the flow that I already created, test permissions. I'm just going to do save as, and I'll do test permission. I'll just call it something else on O. That way I don't have to do all that work all over again. But I do have to go in and change all the references to the site. See, and automatically it's going to be turned off when I first do that. Okay, for selected file, different site. Oh, I got to get the URL for my other site now that I'm doing. This is called, not this one, but where did it go? Oh, project team. Teams/project team. And if I don't feel like looking through this list, well, there it is, but I could always just do enter custom value and just paste it in there. Okay, and then the library I need is, the only one in there is just documents. So then I need to go do the same thing down here. project team, documents, same thing. Now I don't have a policy owner in this new library. I don't have that field that I had in the other one. So you notice it had like kind of a bunch of weird characters in it. Okay, so for this one, I'll just say I want to make everybody in this Office 365 group only have view permission, because this is, I'm about to run the approval process on it and I don't want people accidentally deleting it or messing with it. So this is where now by default, they're all going to have edit, right? Just out of the box, they're all going to have that edit permission level. So I want to change everybody in the site to only have view on here. So let's see. My project team, what happens if I just typed the name of see, it doesn't recognize it. So what's the email address here? What's a quick way to find out the email address of one of these groups? Let's see, it's probably just project team. Project team. Yeah, project team, one word. So that is not, it's not a security group, so it's not going to recognize that. See, it doesn't resolve it. So what I do to do the Office 365 group is my Office 365 group actions. List group members. So that's going to tell me all the members of a group. So I have to pick what group it is. So it's my project team. And then what it's going to give me back is just a list of people. So I want to give that list of people, make them recipients. Now, so what happens though, anytime you have a list of stuff, that's, and if you all took my advanced flow class, this is one of the, like a whole section we had on this concept of an array. So it's going to be a whole list of stuff. So if you try to put a value of something from an array, in another part of your flow, it's going to put it inside of a loop, because then it's going to say for each of these group members, see, for each group member, grant them access. So there are a lot of cases where you don't want it to do this separate action for each individual person. You just want to put all the people in a string, like if you're sending an email to them, or if you're putting them, in an approval process. So I'll go ahead and do a variable for that. There, I gave that one a good name. I didn't do that with the other ones. And so I don't want this to be in a loop, so I'm going to take this back out of here and drag it back out of the loop and delete the loop. Having a lot of unnecessary loops is kind of a pet peeve of mine. It's just kind of, it gets so messy. All right, does this make sense so far? Getting all the people in it seemed useful, getting all the people in an Office 365 group and doing something with them, like sending them an approval, sending them an email, something like that. So I'm going to put them in in the variable, one big string of people with semicolons in between them. So I'll do append to a string variable, and I'll call, that's my var people. And then all their email addresses, I'm going to append the email address and a semicolon. So it is still doing a loop, but for each person, and I'm pointing to my screen here, for each person, it's looping through them and adding their email address to the string variable. And Steve says, what happens when the membership of the group changes? Well, any workflow that gets started after people come and go from the group, it automatically incorporates them in. So that's one less place that you have to go change things, right? It's just automatically going to go look at who all the group members are right then, right when the flow gets triggered. Now, if a flow already got triggered and it already sent whatever it was, an email or an approval or did its thing, then then no. So that's one of the bad things about this one is that it's not, so for as far as permissions, it's going to put them all individually on there. So yeah, that you're totally right. But this principle here of getting everybody into a semicolon delimited string and using it somewhere else that a list of people is needed is that's a very common one. So, but yeah, you're right about exist. So let's go see what it does. Let's go watch it happen. So my recipients are going to be my var people. And I'm just going to change it to can view. And so, but what you can do here is after they've approved it, what do you want to happen? You might want to just put the permissions back how they were or move it somewhere else. So then it may not even matter that you're splitting off and putting all these individuals on it with permissions. Okay, save that. And then now let's go. Larry says, is there a trigger for when membership changes? I don't know. I highly doubt it. But I see where you're going with that. Okay, so here's my marketing compensation report. I mean, if you've got a very strict sort of approval process that you're worried about permissions and things, you may also be, converting it to PDF or something as well. And then that would be a completely new file. Okay, so this, I don't know why I clicked that. Hold on. Okay, that file, flow. There it is, test permissions on. It took a second. Test permissions on Office 365 group. I don't have any, this is the first time I've run it, but I don't have any input parameters or anything. Now, this is also a good reason to use Active Directory email-enabled security groups just across the board. So now that, of course, especially now that we've got this model where everything's a separate site collection, it's kind of painful to go manually add all these members to all these sites. Like what if you've got like a marketing collaboration site, a marketing collateral site, and all these similar sites that all just need a group of marketing people? It would make sense to just have it in Active Directory as a single thing, and that way you could give that group permissions in the sites instead of having to add individuals. So if you went with that model, and if you're a big company, it's most likely that you have something like that implemented. You could also use that as your distribution list for those people. So anything that you probably have a lot of current distribution lists, convert your distribution list to be email-enabled Active Directory security groups instead. And then that way, when somebody joins the marketing team, you just have to add them in one place and they're on the email list, they have permission to all the sites, etc. So in that case, you wouldn't have to go looping through a bunch of Office 365 group members. You could just directly add that AD group and done. Right? So that's going to be more of a best practice instead of a bunch of individuals everywhere. Okay, I started my flow, and let's go see. We'll look at the manage access. This makes me think that hold on. This makes me think that it ran like the older version of this flow, because those are the two people I had in the flow before. I'm pretty sure I saved it though. Let me see. Yeah, it's my Ver people. We'll go look at the log of this thing. Oh, that was the list of people. Because it was just like the same people that I had in the other one. That was the list of people from the O365 group. Yeah. So for a selected file, it initialized my variable, initialized all my variables, got the file properties, did stop sharing. I got all my group members. And then for each group member, I appended their email addresses. So this is all, it's going to show you all their email addresses together into one string. And then when I granted access, notice that it's, see, this is the list of people, semicolon delimited. It's just 3 of us, that's all. And I gave them can view. So that worked. It worked. I just, now it's waiting for an approval. So I think it's waiting for Billy Bob. Dabina, that licensing and pricing model for flows, that is unrelated to SharePoint. That does not apply to any of this. Okay, so here's that approval email we were talking about. They can approve. Now, again, I didn't put anything in the flow for it to do anything once they approve it, but that's the interface. So a couple of you were asking about this thing, this interface in the questions. And so I'm wondering, does yours not look like that? So if you're in OWA, it's going to be nice and pretty, and it's going to have the box rendering inside of the email. But if you're in the Outlook client's just not gonna render. It's just not set up. I don't know. I don't know technically why it doesn't, but the Outlook client doesn't render it nice and slick like that one with the adaptive card in it. So all those, all that stuff Microsoft announced about Flow and Power Apps modeling, pricing, and that has nothing to do with Flow and Power Apps on SharePoint lists, and pretty much all the stuff that I cover in my class, in Power Hour in my class. They're talking about like this stuff, the CRM and the Common Data Service and the model-driven apps, all that stuff, the business process flows and the all the entities and all the stuff in the CDS and dynamics, all that stuff. That's what it applies to, not the stuff we're covering in here. So don't worry. All right, so let's do a folder. So I have, when someone creates a new folder in here, and I'll just have this automatically happen when a new folder is created. So, and I haven't done this. This is one of those just on the fly. You know, I always do a couple things towards the end that it's just I hadn't pre-prepared. So let's try this out. Okay, so I'll do a new one. I want to run this on the same library. So I'm gonna just do save as, just because it's got a few actions in it already having to do with that library. Let's see, permissions. So the attempt is to say when it's run, when a new folder is created, this would change the permissions on it. Desktop application. Oh yeah, so Zach said I believe it's supposed to be updated within the desktop application in the near future. Oh, nice. Yeah, that would be very helpful. That would be nice if if Outlook desktop would do all the same cool things that OWA does. Okay, permissions on folder. So I'm going to delete a bunch of this stuff. Maybe it would have been faster to just create one from scratch. And you can't create an Office 365 group from Flow, by the way, but you have Azure Active Directory connections that you can create them that way. Just you actually have to have higher permissions to be able to use those. All right, I don't need that. Okay, for a selected file. Now, I'm not actually, you know what? I'm not even doing for a selected file. I'm doing just when a new folder gets like on create. So I'm not sure why I did that. All right. Okay, so SharePoint when something gets created. Now I'm going to type folder in here just to double check. So it doesn't have when a folder is created is not a trigger. So I'll just say when a file is created. New file. Not when an item's created. Yeah. There we go. When a file is created. And then it has to check to see if it's a folder or not. Is folder is equal to true. All right, is folder is equal to true, then it will do what we want it to do. Otherwise, it's not going to worry about it. So if it is a folder, then so I want to grant access. So again, I can do the grant access before I do the stop sharing, but if I do grant access, it's just going to add on to whoever already has access to it. It's not going to take away the people that were already there. Stop sharing an item or folder. And then, now this will be interesting with the ID and see if that works on a folder, because I've seen that be kind of tricky in the past before. This might not work. Stop sharing and then let's see. Grant access, blah blah blah. To that item, I'm just going to say whoever created the folder. So I'm just going to, as soon as I create a folder, everybody else gets wiped off and it's only my folder. I'll give them edit. And we'll just do a notify, that's fine. Just your folder is now only yours. That'll be interesting. Now let's see what happens. Okay. Let's see. Okay, a folder got created. Let's see if it even triggers it. I didn't give it a name, did I? Folder permissions. Oh, it does the abbreviated card as well, as Laura showed. Davina says, does that mean I don't have to worry about how many flows may be used in a SharePoint solution? Well, you still have it. It's still counting your flow runs, I believe, your runs, like it always has. So I don't know the answer to that as to how the flow run count is now going to be impacted when they change the licensing for SharePoint stuff. I don't know. I'm trying to look to cover everybody's questions. All right. I think I did. Ooh, it failed. Yep, thought so. The response is not in a JSON format. Okay. So let's, for this being a folder, I'd probably want to try some other action that is doing something else on the folder, just to make sure that the ID is not the problem. It says ID 4, and that's the ID of the folder, but response is not in a JSON format. Yeah. I think it's expecting a different type of ID when it's a folder. So if it's a folder, oh, create new folder. That's new. That is definitely new. Because I was doing a workaround with like doing something with the SharePoint services, web services to be able to do that before. So like literally this must have just come out with all that other new stuff that came out. List folder is going to list everything in it. Copy folder. Get folder metadata. Okay, let's try this. I'll just rerun it. I know it's almost time to stop, but it's fun stuff. Oh, okay, thanks, Devin. Yeah. What is it doing? Yeah, so it was still it still was saving. Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right. We'll see what happens with that one. Did not find the folder for in site. Ensure that the folder exists. Yeah. File identifier. Oh, I'm supposed to use the identifier, not the ID. Of course, right? Okay, saving. Well, wait for it to finish saving. And go. Okay, so it didn't error out on this one this time. It errored out on the other one. So I think I need to use that identifier down here. Yeah, so it's got the item ID. That might be one of those situations like earlier at the very beginning of Power Hour when I had to kind of convert something from one type of value to another for it to be able to, recognize it in this box. I know I've done this with folders, so I'll have to go look. I'll probably just have to go look at some older ones that I did. But yeah, so the next thing I'd would be playing around with like this identifier, which it might be what I need. So I might need the identifier here, but it doesn't have identifier as something I can pick from. I'm not sure what even the structure is of the identifier either. I don't know. All right, well, we got close, but the folder, I had a feeling that the way the folder ID, identifier, item ID, that whole thing is different would probably impact using it in these actions. So yeah, definitely. But so if you come across that, it's not you. It's just gonna take a little more digging to be able to get the right sort of structure of what ID it needs in here to be able to do that action. And I mean, it's also possible, let me flip back over to this. It is also possible that it says stop sharing an item or folder, but the item works and the folder just doesn't work yet because it's brand new. I don't know. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind when you're testing this. That is a good question. Lisa says, how does the flow know that the folder is documents in this step? It would, you need to tell it. I mean, it's got an ID. So every single thing in a library has an ID, whether or not it's a folder or a file. So you would think just giving it the ID would just do what it needs to do. But I think it needs a different structure. So, but the folder, Lisa, is not documents. The library is documents, and the folder is the one that I created called projects or something like that. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. I hope you all had a good summer, and hopefully you all are going to Microsoft Ignite. Also, if you are still using InfoPath, read my blog post and fill out my survey that I'm doing about InfoPath, about stop using InfoPath, and so kind of gather up and see what some of the reasons are, and hopefully that'll be an eye-opener for companies that are just still kind of sitting around, I don't know, waiting for something. I'm not sure what they're waiting for though. So thanks for filling out my survey. Thanks for coming. Happy Wednesday.